It was one of those sticky, warm nights that felt endless, where the air seemed thick with memories. The old restaurant, with its dim lighting and faint scent of bourbon and spice, hosted our reunion. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the room as people reminisced about years gone by. At first, it was all shallow chatter and polite laughs, the kind you expect at events like this. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw her, Cora, and she was waiting for me. I tried to ignore it at first, but then I noticed him, Liam, her so-called high school flame. I'd heard about him in passing, never paying much attention, assuming it was just nostalgia talking, but that night felt different. He was taller, broader, wearing that self-assured grin that told you he knew he looked good and probably thought he still had a hold on her. Cora's face lit up the moment she saw him, looking younger and almost excited. It had been ages since I'd seen that expression directed at me. They started chatting, oblivious to everyone else. I watched, feeling a mix of anger, confusion, and a heavy unease that I couldn't shake. They laughed, exchanging stories like the years apart hadn't even happened. Liam was really laying it on thick. I caught snatches of his compliments rising above the room's noise. Things like, "You haven't aged a bit," and "I still remember those wild weekends." It was like they were in some high school reunion movie. Right then, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Cora had that look, the one she used to have when we first got together, back when we couldn't keep our hands off each other. It hit me hard, and I realized this night was going to be a turning point. After about an hour, I finally walked over, trying to stay calm, but Cora barely glanced my way when I said hello. Her attention was glued to Liam like I wasn't even there. I tried to play it off, but Liam wore this smug expression, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Eventually, I gave up and walked away, feeling like a stranger in my own life. And that was only the beginning. After that night, things got strange. Cora started dressing differently, putting in effort she hadn't in years. She'd always been beautiful, but now it was like she was getting ready for a performance every time she left the house. New outfits, fresh haircut, manicured nails. She even began wearing perfume again. I sensed something was off, but she brushed off my questions, laughing like I was just being paranoid. What really unsettled me, though, was Cora's friend, Veronica, getting involved. Veronica had always been close to us, someone we trusted, but she seemed oddly excited by Cora's new energy. She even joked with me about Cora's second wind or something like that. I wanted to believe it was all harmless, but a gut feeling told me to be cautious. One night, I caught Cora texting someone late, the light from her phone illuminating her face under the covers. Casually, I asked, "Who's texting you this late?" "Oh, just Veronica," she replied, her voice too casual. "She's dealing with family drama, you know how she is." I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. Then, Cora began going out more, making little excuses about catching up with friends or needing me time. Each time I asked, "Seeing anyone in particular?" she'd just laugh, waving it off with a too sweet smile. "Just some girlfriends," she'd say, but every word felt like another weight on my chest. One evening, Veronica came over, and there was a strange tension in the air. She looked at me with a mix of pity and concern, finally saying, "Have you noticed anything different with Cora?" I hesitated but admitted, "Yeah, something feels off." Veronica bit her lip, nodding. "Just keep an eye on things, okay? And let me know if you need anything." Her words lingered, heavy with unspoken accusations. We both knew something was happening, something that would shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about Cora. That night was a turning point. Like a red flag I couldn't ignore, I started noticing every little detail, tracking things Cora probably thought I'd overlook. Unfamiliar numbers showed up on our phone bill, late-night calls she claimed were just catching up with Veronica. Her tone was too low, too secretive for simple chats with a friend. Every night felt like a countdown, and I was close to cracking, like a fuse ready to spark, unsure where it would lead. The suspicion gnawed at me, corroding the image of our relationship like rust. The hardest part was watching her drift further away, shifting her attention from our family, our life, to something or someone else. I wasn't about to stand by and let her dismantle our marriage without a fight. It started with small changes. I convinced myself she might be dealing with something personal, maybe just a phase, but I could feel her slipping away, a wall going up between us, brick by brick. Cora spent more time on her phone, finding reasons to be out in the evenings, calling it girls' night or saying she needed some alone time. She'd smile that same sweet smile that once made me melt, but now it felt like a thin veil hiding something else. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, but each time she left, that chill in my gut grew louder, whispering that something was very wrong. One evening, her phone rang, and she glanced at me before stepping out onto the balcony, barely shutting the door behind her. The air felt thick as I strained to catch anything I could. I heard snippets, just a few words slipping through the doorway. "Yes, I miss you." Her voice low, softer than usual, followed by, "We can meet." That was all I caught, but it was enough. A jolt of jealousy surged through me, hot and unyielding. I tried to calm myself, to convince myself it wasn't what it sounded like, but the pieces were falling into place no matter how much I didn't want to believe it. When she came back inside, she glanced at me, her face carefully composed. She gave me that same fake, sweet smile she'd been using more often lately. "Just Veronica," she said. "She's going through a rough patch, and I didn't want to bother you with it." I didn't press her, but I knew she was lying. I could feel it. Every word dripped with dishonesty. I was stuck, unsure if confronting her would make things worse, or if I should keep quiet, hoping she'd come clean eventually. But every time I tried to meet her gaze, hoping she'd open up, she'd slip further behind that rehearsed smile. A few nights later, I went out with some friends from work. We met at a low-key bar, the kind with a faint smell of aged wood and stale beer. The perfect place for unwinding after a long day. But that night I struggled to keep up the casual banter. It must have shown on my face, because eventually Travis, an old friend, looked at me and asked, "What's going on, man? You've been somewhere else all night." At first I tried to brush it off with a laugh, but eventually the weight of keeping it in felt pointless. "It's Cora," I admitted, glancing around as if she might appear and overhear. "She's different, distant, always on her phone, going out every evening, brushing off my questions." Travis gave me a serious nod, his look shifting from casual concern to something deeper. "You think there's someone else?" he asked. Hearing it said aloud hit me like a blow, giving voice to the dread I'd tried to ignore. "I don't know," I replied, though even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. Travis didn't press, but leaned in, speaking low. "Look, I hope I'm wrong, but if you suspect something, don't ignore it. Pay attention. Keep track. I can even help if you need." His offer lingered, and though the idea felt unsettling, I knew he was right. If I wanted answers, I couldn't just sit around hoping she'd come clean. The following weekend, I tried to set it all aside and suggested we go out for dinner, a chance to reconnect, or at least get a read on what was going on between us. She agreed, but when we got to the restaurant, her mind was clearly elsewhere. I caught her glancing at her phone every few minutes, scanning the room as if expecting someone. I tried making small talk, asking about her day and her plans, but she only gave short answers, her eyes returning to her phone. My patience was wearing thin, and I barely held back from calling her out right then and there. When she excused herself to go to the restroom, I picked up her phone, hoping to find something that would make sense of it all. But of course, it was locked. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself snooping. I wasn't proud, but I needed answers. Going through her laptop when she wasn't home, I found a hidden social media account under a name I'd never heard her use. There were message threads, conversations stretching late into the night. She was talking to Liam. That was it. The proof. She'd been hiding this whole connection behind a fake identity, keeping me in the dark. I'd barely scratched the surface, but from what I saw they were careless, almost as if they thought I'd never suspect anything. Seeing their messages, the way she laughed with him, talked to him with warmth I hadn't felt in years, made me feel like a complete fool. There were moments I wanted to smash the laptop, confront her with every word they'd exchanged, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the need to plan, to see just how deep her lies went before I laid it all out. There was no denying it now. I'd been watching my marriage crumble bit by bit. But now I had the final proof that she'd left everything we'd built, everything I believed in. And the worst part? She was so wrapped up in her little affair that she hadn't even noticed me catching on. So I waited. I watched. Every time she slipped away for a girls' night or took a call on the balcony, I knew my patience wouldn't hold much longer. I arranged to meet Veronica at a quiet cafe off the main street. It felt odd calling her just to talk about Cora, but I needed someone who understood, someone who knew both of us. She'd been close to us for years, and it was strange realizing she was the only person I could trust to be honest. The moment she sat down, I saw a blend of pity and anger in her expression. She'd always been more loyal to me than to Cora, and as I told her everything, that loyalty showed. I laid it all out. Every lie, every girls' night Cora had slipped away for, each glance I'd seen her shoot at her phone. Veronica listened, her face growing tighter with every detail. She didn't hold back, openly calling Cora a selfish coward. Hearing someone else say it felt like validation, like a weight lifting. There was a charged silence between us, a tension I hadn't expected. When she reached across the table to take my hand, her touch was warm and grounding. I couldn't remember the last time someone looked at me with such genuine care. It felt strange, almost wrong, but real. Without even realizing it, I leaned into that warmth, and that night, one thing led to another. We ended up together. We ended up together, not just in revenge, but in reclaiming a part of myself I thought I'd lost. It felt satisfying, not just because of what happened, but because it reminded me that I wasn't the fool Cora assumed I was. After that night, everything shifted. Veronica and I became allies, sharing a common goal. We were partners in a new sense, feeding off each other's determination to expose Cora's lies and make her fully understand what she was about to lose. Together, we started piecing things together, planning out exactly how to reveal her betrayal and ensure she knew precisely what she had thrown away. We began meeting frequently, sometimes in public, sometimes at my place, planning out how to catch her in a way she couldn't deny. Veronica suggested we dig into Liam's life, maybe uncover something that would reveal his true colors. If Cora had chosen him over me, perhaps there was something in his past that might make her see him differently. That's when we found Bart, an old friend of Liam's from years back. Veronica knew someone who connected us, and soon I was sitting in a dim bar with Bart, hearing stories that made my blood boil. Bart had no problem sharing every sordid detail. Liam had a long history of manipulating women, using them for his own gain, and Bart was all too eager to talk, clearly bitter about how things had ended between them. The more I listened, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about me anymore. Liam wasn't some innocent old flame for Cora. He was a manipulator, plain and simple, and she'd fallen right into his trap. Bart recounted Liam's usual tricks, how he would charm people into getting what he wanted. Liam even bragged to Bart about how easy it was to manipulate women, coaxing them into buying things for him or covering his expenses. I could feel my anger intensify, a rage I hadn't experienced before. Veronica played her part flawlessly, coming by my place often, sometimes staying just as Cora might be coming home. It wasn't obvious but left subtle clues. A scarf left draped over a chair, lipstick on the bathroom counter, just enough to make Cora notice. I could tell it was working from the way she started to look at me, a flicker of doubt and jealousy she tried to hide. I wanted her to feel that same twist of betrayal I'd been carrying. Veronica and I met up late at night, sometimes just to talk, other times for more, blurring the line between revenge and something real. It reminded me of what I was fighting for, not just to expose her affair, but to regain control, proving I hadn't lost everything. We continued meeting Bart, each time learning a little more about Liam's shady past. The stories piled up, painting a clear picture of who Liam really was. One story especially stuck with me. He'd once conned an ex-girlfriend into funding a fake business venture, draining her savings before vanishing once she had nothing left. This was the man Cora had thrown everything away for. Knowing this brought a strange satisfaction. The pieces were coming together, and soon enough, she'd see Liam for what he really was. Veronica fully embraced her role, bringing me coffee, running errands, and staying around long enough for Cora to notice. It was just enough to make her jealous without giving her grounds to confront me. Watching her squirm, seeing doubt creep into her eyes, was a small taste of payback, a way to shift the balance in my favor, even if only briefly. In secret meetings with Bart, as he disclosed more about Liam's unsavory history, my plans solidified. Cora would see the truth, whether she wanted to or not, and I'd be there to watch it all unfold. When I finally took a closer look at our finances, the full picture became clear. At first, it was just a nagging thought in the back of my mind. I didn't want to believe she'd be foolish enough to pour money into her fling with Liam. But as I went through our bank statements, receipts, and credit card bills, reality hit hard. She had been funding their little escapades, not just paying for hotels and dinners, but also gifts, and, most absurdly, business investments under his name. I found records of wire transfers into his account for who knows what projects he'd convinced her to support. I was shocked the woman I'd married had fallen for his scams. I kept digging, and the deeper I went, the worse it became. I printed everything, receipts, statements, all the proof I needed to show just how far she'd gone. This wasn't a casual affair. She was fully invested in him emotionally and financially. I remembered all the times she scolded me about spending, the arguments over a few dollars here and there, and here she was, draining our finances for someone like him. I brought everything to Veronica, who'd somehow become both my confidant and co-conspirator. We met at my place, spreading the evidence across the dining room table like a battlefield. Veronica didn't mince words, nor did I. "It's sick, isn't it?" I muttered, scanning the pages. How could she have done this? Veronica shook her head, her lips pressed in a tight line. "She's blind, Aiden, but that doesn't mean she gets to get away with it. This is the kind of evidence that'll destroy her in court." And she was right. A week later, we sat across from a lawyer, a no-nonsense professional who listened as we laid out every detail, the affair, the money, all of it. He scanned each piece of evidence, not blinking, clearly accustomed to cases like this. By the end, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "With this, she won't walk away with a dime. This will ruin her credibility." That was exactly what I needed to hear. We began planning the divorce, building a case that would ensure she'd leave with nothing but the mess she'd created. But I wasn't going to stop there. I wanted people to know the truth, especially her family, who trusted her and had no idea who she'd become. One evening, I visited her parents. It felt strange sitting in their warm, welcoming home. They'd always been kind to me, and I knew they didn't deserve the lies she'd dragged them into. I didn't hold back, laying out each fact one by one. The affair, the money, the deception. I watched the shock cross their faces, saw her father's disbelief and her mother's grief. They sat in stunned silence, letting the truth sink in. Her mother began to cry, and her father clenched his jaw, hardening with each word I spoke. It hurt to break it to them, but they needed to know. After that, they stopped reaching out to her, stopped inviting her over. Their loyalties were clear. With everything in place, Veronica and I made one final stop, the hotel where Cora had met Liam so many times. We walked in together, playing our parts, pretending to be just another couple checking in, but we had a specific goal in mind: the security footage. Veronica had managed to contact someone who worked there, a guy willing to look the other way for a bit of cash. After a few hours, we walked out with exactly what we needed: clear photos of Cora and Liam together, laughing and holding hands as if they had no worries at all. It was the final piece, the undeniable proof that would ensure her web of lies couldn't stand a chance. I could already imagine the look on her face when she realized just how much I knew, how thoroughly she had been exposed. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control again, ready to watch her entire facade crumble around her. As the court date approached, the tension between us became palpable. Cora tried to keep up the act, pretending like everything was normal, as if I had no idea what she'd been doing. But cracks were beginning to show in her composure, and she couldn't maintain her usual mask. I noticed the flicker of fear in her eyes each time I entered the room, a glimmer that revealed she was finally realizing the depth of the mess she'd created. The walls were closing in, and the weight of everything she'd discarded was creeping up on her. I was counting the days until I could lay it all out in court, but there was one more move I wanted to make first. I needed her to understand exactly who she'd sacrificed me for. She'd been living in some fantasy, oblivious to the truth about Liam. But that was about to change. Veronica and I had gathered plenty of evidence on Liam's past schemes, his endless string of gullible women. It brought me grim satisfaction knowing she was about to learn just how deep her betrayal ran, not only against me, but against herself. One night, as Cora sat across from me, I let her have it. I exposed Liam's history, how he manipulated women for money and gifts, living off others rather than earning his way. Her face turned pale as I laid out each sordid detail, the color draining as she realized the full extent of her mistake. I showed her the messages we'd found, the stories Bart had shared, every piece of it. She looked ready to be sick, her hands trembling as she held the evidence, her eyes darting back and forth as though trying to find a way to deny it all. "You thought he loved you," I said, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "You thought you were special? You were just another mark, another bank account to drain." She sat in silence, too stunned to respond, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for words. I watched, waiting for her to grasp the full scope of her actions, but she merely shook her head, clinging to denial like a lifeline. A few days later, she attempted to contact Liam, probably to demand answers, to see if any part of her twisted little dream was real. But of course, he ignored her. Her calls, her texts, each desperate attempt went unanswered, and with every rejection, I saw the panic growing in her eyes. Eventually, she tracked him down, cornering him at a cafe they'd frequented. Though I wasn't there, word got back to me that it didn't go well. She'd shown up, nearly pleading for him to assure her that what they had was genuine. But he didn't sugarcoat anything. He bluntly told her she was of no interest to him anymore, not without her money. He made it clear she'd been nothing more than a means to an end, and now that she had nothing left to give, he was done. I could only imagine her face as he walked away, leaving her standing there alone with the broken pieces of her own poor decisions. She came home late that night, her face pale, her eyes empty. She barely glanced at me as she drifted by, disappearing into the bedroom without a word. I didn't need to ask what had happened. The truth had finally caught up to her. In the days that followed, Cora fell into a haunting silence. She spent hours just sitting, staring at the empty walls where our family photos had once hung. Photos I'd removed one by one, leaving nothing to distract her from the hollow life she'd built. She was alone now, isolated, with no one left to turn to. Her friends had distanced themselves. Her family wanted nothing to do with her. And now even Liam had tossed her aside like yesterday's trash. She was entirely alone, forced to face the consequences of her actions, with no one there to catch her fall. As much as I had once loved her, As much as I'd tried to salvage the life we'd built, I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for her. This was the end of her ill-fated romance, the final chapter in a story she had written herself. She'd betrayed me and everything we'd had together. And now, as she sat alone in that empty house, she was paying the price. Once the divorce was finalized, it was as if a massive weight had been lifted. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, and the twisted mess Cora had created. Standing on the other side of it all, I could finally see my life clearly again. Veronica had been there through everything, steady and supportive in ways I hadn't anticipated, but had come to depend on. After all that had happened, it just felt natural to step into this new chapter with her by my side. We didn't hide our relationship. After months of covert revenge and hidden plans, I didn't feel the need to conceal anything anymore. Veronica and I started going out together openly, attending events, spending time with friends, enjoying life without pretense. People noticed, of course, and soon whispers started circulating. Everyone knew that something had gone wrong between Cora and me, though they didn't know all the details. Bits and pieces of the truth trickled through our social circles, and speculation grew. Cora's betrayal became a known secret, the subject of quiet discussions, while Veronica and I unexpectedly found ourselves in the spotlight in a good way. People began to see her as my true partner, someone who had stood by me through it all. There was one last thing I wanted to do. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not really. I simply wanted to close this chapter in a way that left no doubt about what had happened and who was responsible. I planned a gathering, inviting friends and mutual acquaintances, people who had once been part of our lives. I knew Cora would come. It was the one place she wouldn't want to miss. Though deep down, she knew it would be painful. The night of the event, I felt an eerie calm as the room filled with people. Veronica stood beside me, a constant, supportive presence amidst the crowd. When Cora arrived, her face fell instantly. She scanned the room, likely realizing she had walked into something she couldn't escape. I watched her struggle to keep up appearances, to maintain that well-rehearsed smile, but it was slipping. The weight of everything was visibly pressing on her. Halfway through the evening, I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and silenced the room. Lifting my glass, I began, "Thank you all for coming." I projected my voice. Some of you might have heard bits and pieces, whispers of what's been happening these past months. Tonight, I want to tell you the truth. I paused, allowing the silence to settle heavily, as every eye in the room focused on me. Then I started, recounting it all. From the first hint that something was wrong, to the ultimate betrayal with Liam. I held nothing back, exposing the raw truth of Cora's actions. To solidify it, I revealed the evidence. The photos, messages, and bank statements, each one hitting harder than the last. As I laid it all out, Cora's face drained of color, her mouth gaping as the reality of her actions unfolded around her. The people nearby shifted uncomfortably, their expressions morphing from surprise to disgust as they took in the full depth of her betrayal. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered, unable to form words, as her usual charm crumbled under the weight of her lies. It was her final humiliation, the moment she had to confront the consequences of her choices with nowhere left to hide. She slumped into a chair, head bowed as the room filled with murmurs, her actions now exposed to everyone she once knew. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the damage she'd caused, the life she'd so recklessly discarded. And she couldn't bear it. She was left sitting there in shame, a broken version of the person she had once pretended to be. After that night, everything felt lighter. I knew that chapter was closed, that nothing remained to keep me tied to the past. I was finally free, released from the lies, betrayal, and resentment that had clouded my life for so long. Veronica and I stepped into a new future together, ready to leave the past behind and focus on what lay ahead. Looking around that evening, at the friends who had stood by me, and at the woman who had been my rock through it all, I realized I was finally free to live the life I deserved. This was the closure I needed. A fresh start, a clean slate, and a future untangled from the web of deceit and pain Cora's betrayal had woven.